Other might say no.
You feel good about your own honey, you will be. Am I? You broke your leg. You'll get over it. Hannah. He came back. I got the lead.
Whoa!
You got this. Up in case I was feeling
talk to me. I'm not a little kid anymore.
Every time I look at you, all I see is how much I love you.
Copyright disclaimer under Section 107 of the Copyright Act 1976. Allowance is made for fair use for purposes such as criticism, comment, news reporting, scholarship, and research. Fair use is a use permitted by copyright statute that might otherwise be infringing. Nonprofit, educational, or personal use tips the balance in favor of fair use.
There are some movies that immediately tell you what kind of experience they want to give you. And then there are movies that quietly pull you into a character's life before you even realize how emotional the journey is going to become. Don't Say Good Luck belongs much more to the second category. On the surface, it looks like a simple coming-of-age story about a teenager, school theater, friendships, and the excitement of finally getting the opportunity she has been waiting for. But underneath that cheerful setup is a much more personal story about family, fear, growing up, and what happens when something you have dreamed about suddenly arrives at exactly the wrong moment. At the center of the story is Sophie Byronbaum, a high school student who is deeply passionate about theater. For Sophie, performing isn't simply another school activity that she happens to enjoy. It is something that gives her confidence and allows her to express a side of herself that doesn't always come out in everyday life. Like many teenagers who find a place where they feel comfortable, Sophie has built part of her identity around the stage. She knows the excitement of rehearsals, the nervousness before an audition, and that strange feeling of imagining what it would be like to stand in front of everyone and finally prove that all the hard work was worth it. And now Sophie has a chance to do exactly that. Her school is preparing a musical, and she has her eyes on one particular role. She has been practicing, preparing, and thinking about the audition, hoping that this might finally be the moment when everything comes together. There is something very relatable about that situation, because most people remember what it felt like to desperately want something when they were younger. Maybe it was a role in a school play, a place on a sports team, an opportunity to impress someone, or simply the chance to be recognized for something they were genuinely good at. For Sophie, this audition means more than just getting a part in a musical. It represents the possibility of stepping out of the background and becoming the person she has always wanted to be. She is excited, nervous, and probably a little terrified at the same time. But just when she thinks the biggest challenge in her life is going to be getting through that audition, something happens that completely changes the meaning of everything she has been preparing for. Sophie discovers that her mother's cancer has returned. That revelation hits differently, because it doesn't come at some distant point in her life when she has time to prepare herself emotionally. It arrives right around the moment when Sophie is supposed to be thinking about something exciting. She should be worrying about her performance, her lines, her singing, and whether she is good enough to get the role. Instead, she suddenly has something much heavier occupying her mind, and this is where the movie begins to separate itself from a simple high school musical story. Sophie is now caught between two completely different worlds. In one world, she is a teenager chasing a dream and trying to enjoy one of the biggest opportunities she has ever received. In the other, she is a daughter who has just been reminded that her family is facing something frightening and uncertain. The emotional conflict becomes even more complicated because Sophie doesn't necessarily know how she is supposed to react. There isn't a perfect answer. She can't simply stop being excited about the musical, but at the same time, it becomes difficult to celebrate when someone she loves is going through something so serious. That mixture of happiness and sadness is one of the most human parts of the story. Her mother, Elizabeth, becomes one of the most important people in Sophie's journey. Their relationship isn't presented as some perfect movie version of a mother and daughter. Instead, there is a sense that they genuinely care about each other, while also struggling with the fact that neither of them completely knows how to handle what is happening. Elizabeth has her own fears, but she also wants her daughter to continue living her life. And that creates another emotional question for Sophie. Should she keep pursuing her dream when her family is dealing with something much more serious? Should she allow herself to be happy? Or does being happy somehow make her selfish? Those questions don't have easy answers, and that's exactly why the story works as a coming-of-age experience. Growing up isn't just about getting older. Sometimes it means discovering that life can put completely opposite emotions in front of you at the same time. You can be incredibly happy and deeply scared on the same day. You can laugh with your friends and then suddenly feel guilty for laughing. You can want to celebrate something while another part of you is preparing for the worst. At school, however, life continues moving forward. The musical doesn't stop because Sophie is dealing with problems at home. Rehearsals continue. Other students are competing for roles. The director still expects everyone to show up prepared. Friends still want to talk about relationships and school drama. In other words, the outside world doesn't automatically slow down just because your personal life has become complicated. That contrast becomes one of the movie's strongest ideas. On stage, Sophie is expected to perform. She has to learn her character, remember her lines, hit the right moments, and convince everyone that she belongs in the role. Offstage, she is trying to understand what is happening to her own family. And the more she tries to separate those two worlds, the harder it becomes. The people around Sophie also become important because they represent different parts of her teenage life. Her friends provide the lighter side of the story, giving her moments where she can temporarily forget what is happening at home. There is also the normal awkwardness of teenage relationships, crush, and trying to figure out what you actually want from another person. Those moments may seem small compared with the larger family situation, but they are important because they remind us that Sophie is still a teenager. She hasn't suddenly become an adult just because her family is facing a difficult situation. She still wants to have fun. She still wants to perform. She still wants to experience romance and friendship. And she still wants to know that her own life can continue. That is where the title begins to feel especially meaningful. The phrase "don't say good luck" carries the kind of superstition and tradition you often hear around theater performers. But within Sophie's story, the idea of luck becomes almost symbolic. She isn't simply hoping that her audition goes well anymore. She is entering a period of her life where she has very little control over what happens next. She can prepare for the audition. She can rehearse her songs. She can try to become the best performer possible. But she can't rehearse for what happens inside her family. She can't control her mother's illness. She can't predict how the situation will change. And she certainly can't guarantee that everything will work out the way she wants. That makes Sophie's dream feel even more important. The musical becomes a place where she can still make choices. On stage, she knows what she is supposed to do. She knows the story, the character, the music, and the performance. Real life is much harder because there is no script telling her what comes next. As Sophie moves deeper into rehearsals, the pressure begins to build. The role she wanted so badly is no longer simply a reason to celebrate. It becomes another emotional responsibility. She wants to give the performance everything she has, but part of her mind keeps returning to home. And this is where the story starts asking a question that will follow. Sophie, for much of the journey, can you continue chasing your own happiness while someone you love is going through pain? The answer isn't as simple as choosing one side. Sophie slowly has to learn that caring about her family doesn't mean she has to give up everything that makes her happy. At the same time, pursuing her dream doesn't mean she can ignore the people around her. That balance is going to become the real challenge, because the musical may be what everyone sees. But Sophie's real performance is happening away from the stage. She is learning how to deal with fear, uncertainty, love, disappointment, and the uncomfortable truth that growing up sometimes means realizing you cannot protect the people you love from everything. And as the big performance gets closer, Sophie has to decide whether she is going to let everything happening around her destroy the dream she worked so hard for, or whether she can carry all of that emotion with her and somehow turn it into something meaningful. For the first time, the stage isn't just a place where Sophie wants to be seen, As Sophie continues moving between school and home, the difference between those two worlds becomes harder to ignore. At school, everyone is focused on the upcoming musical. The rehearsals become more serious, the expectations become higher, and every student involved is starting to feel the pressure. For Sophie, though, there is something else happening beneath the surface. She is physically present, but her mind isn't always in the rehearsal room. There are moments when she can completely forget about everything else. When the music starts and she gets into character, Sophie feels like herself again. For those few minutes, she doesn't have to think about doctors, treatments, or what might happen to her mother. She can simply be a teenager doing something she loves. But as soon as the rehearsal ends, reality comes rushing back. That emotional switch becomes exhausting. Sophie also begins to understand that her mother isn't just worried about her health. Elizabeth is worried about Sophie. She knows that her daughter is trying to stay strong, and she can probably see that Sophie is holding back emotions she doesn't know how to express. Instead of wanting Sophie to give up everything, Elizabeth wants her daughter to keep experiencing life. That creates some complicated moments between them. Sophie may think that focusing on the musical means she is ignoring her mother, while Elizabeth sees the musical as something that could actually help Sophie get through this difficult period. Neither one is necessarily wrong. They are simply looking at the same situation from different sides, and that is what makes their relationship feel believable. They love each other, But love doesn't automatically make difficult conversations easy. At school, Sophie also has to deal with the normal problems that come with being a teenager. Her friendships aren't always perfect, and the emotional uncertainty of relationships adds another layer to everything she is already experiencing. She wants people around her to understand what she is going through, but she doesn't always know how much she should tell them. Sometimes, she chooses to keep things private. That decision makes sense because Sophie doesn't want every conversation to become about her mother's illness. She doesn't want people looking at her differently or treating her like someone who needs sympathy. She still wants to be Sophie, the girl who loves theater and can laugh with her friends. But keeping everything inside has a cost. The more Sophie tries to handle everything alone, the more pressure builds. Small problems begin to feel much bigger than they normally would. A difficult rehearsal can become incredibly frustrating. A disagreement with a friend can hurt more than expected. Even an ordinary conversation at home can suddenly turn emotional. That is the reality of grief and fear before anything has even happened. Sometimes the hardest part isn't knowing exactly what the future holds. It's living with the uncertainty of not knowing. For Sophie, the musical becomes almost like a countdown. Every rehearsal brings her closer to opening night, but it also brings her closer to a moment when she will have to put everything she is feeling aside and perform in front of an audience. And there is something almost ironic about that. The whole purpose of theater is to make people believe in a story. Actors step onto a stage and become someone else. They show emotions even when those emotions aren't necessarily their own. They learn how to cry on cue, smile on cue, and deliver lines exactly when they are supposed to. But Sophie is discovering that real emotions don't work that way. You can't simply decide when fear should disappear. You can't tell yourself to stop worrying and expect your mind to listen. And you certainly can't choose exactly when sadness is going to hit you. That difference between acting and real life becomes increasingly important as Sophie gets closer to the performance. Her friends also start noticing that something is different. Even if Sophie doesn't explain everything, people who know her well can tell when she isn't completely herself. Some try to help in their own way. Others may not understand what she needs. And that is another realistic part of the story. Sometimes the people who care about you don't know how to help because there isn't really anything they can say that will fix the problem. They can listen. They can stay beside you. They can make you laugh for a few minutes, but they can't change the situation. Sophie gradually begins to realize that she doesn't need everyone to solve her problems. She simply needs people who are willing to stay with her while she deals with them. At the same time, her relationship with Elizabeth becomes more emotional. Sophie's mother tries to remain strong, but Sophie can see that she is scared too. This changes the way Sophie looks at her mother. For most of her life, Elizabeth has probably been someone Sophie could depend on. Now Sophie is seeing a different side of her. She sees the vulnerability, she sees the fear, and perhaps for the first time, Sophie understands that parents don't always have all the answers. That realization is painful, but it is also part of growing up. As the story moves forward, Sophie starts becoming more mature, not because she suddenly has everything figured out, but because she begins accepting that some things cannot be controlled. She cannot control the illness. She cannot control every decision her friends make. She cannot control what happens after the curtain goes up. What she can control is how she responds, and that becomes the central emotional journey of the story. Meanwhile, the musical continues to demand everything from her. The cast has to work together, scenes have to be polished, songs have to be practiced, and everyone is counting down toward the final performance. The closer they get, the more Sophie realizes that this opportunity means something different to her now. At the beginning, she wanted the role because she wanted to prove herself. Now she wants to perform because she needs something that belongs to her, something that reminds her that even during the hardest period of her life, she is still allowed to dream. That realization changes her attitude. She stops worrying so much about being perfect. Instead, she begins focusing on being honest. And ironically, that may make her a better performer, because the emotions she has been trying to hide are now giving her a deeper understanding of what it means to perform. She isn't simply pretending to feel something anymore. She knows what fear feels like. She knows what love feels like. She knows what it means to desperately want things to stay the same while knowing they might not. Those experiences begin shaping the person she is becoming. There are still difficult moments, of course, Sophie doesn't suddenly become fearless. She still has days when everything feels overwhelming. She still has moments when she wishes she could go back to the simpler version of her life, but she is slowly learning that strength doesn't mean never breaking down. Sometimes strength means admitting that you're scared and continuing anyway. And as opening night approaches, that lesson becomes more important than ever. The audience will only see Sophie when she steps onto the stage. They will see the costume, the lights, the music, and the performance. They won't see all the things she carried with her before walking into that room. They won't know how many times she questioned herself. They won't know how difficult it was to keep rehearsing. They won't know how many times she thought about staying home instead, but Sophie will know. And that is what makes the upcoming performance so much more than a school musical. It becomes a moment where everything she has been carrying finally has somewhere to go. The fear, the love, the anger, the hope, all of it. And while Sophie still doesn't know what the future will bring for her family, she is beginning to understand something important. Sometimes you don't get to choose the circumstances you're given, but you can choose what you do with the time you have. That is the lesson Sophie is carrying with her as the final rehearsal approaches, and when the curtain is finally ready to rise. She isn't the same girl who walked into that audition hoping to get noticed. She has already changed. Now all that's left is to see what happens when she steps onto that stage. The closer Sophie gets to opening night, the more she realizes that the performance she has been preparing for isn't going to be just another school event. In the beginning, she thought getting the role would be the biggest challenge. Then her mother's illness changed everything, and suddenly the musical became connected to a much bigger part of her life. The rehearsals continue, but Sophie is no longer approaching them with the same mindset. She still wants to do well, but perfection isn't as important to her as it once was. She has started to understand that sometimes you spend so much time worrying about whether you're good enough that you forget why you wanted something in the first place. For Sophie, the reason was always simple. She loved performing. She loved the feeling of standing on a stage and becoming someone else for a few minutes. She loved the energy of the music and the people around her. She loved being part of something larger than herself. And now, after everything that has happened, she begins to appreciate those moments in a completely different way, but that doesn't mean the fear has disappeared. If anything, the closer the performance gets, the more emotional Sophie becomes. She knows that her mother is dealing with something serious, and there is always that quiet question sitting in the back of her mind. What happens next? That uncertainty follows her everywhere, even when she is laughing with her friends. She can feel it, even when she is rehearsing. She can feel it. And sometimes, even when she is at home with her mother, she finds herself thinking about the future instead of enjoying the moment in front of her. That is one of the hardest things Sophie has to learn. When you're afraid of losing something, it's easy to spend so much time worrying about tomorrow that you forget to experience today. Elizabeth seems to understand this better than Sophie does. Despite everything she is going through, she doesn't want her daughter to put her entire life on hold. She wants Sophie to continue going to school, spending time with friends, and preparing for the musical. For Elizabeth, seeing Sophie chase something she loves is not painful. In some ways, it gives her hope. But Sophie doesn't always see it that way. She sometimes feels guilty for enjoying herself while her mother is struggling. It's almost as if happiness feels inappropriate when someone you love is hurting, and that is a feeling many people can understand. When life becomes difficult, even the things that normally make you happy can suddenly feel complicated. Sophie has to learn that being happy doesn't mean she doesn't care. Laughing doesn't mean she has forgotten. Going to rehearsal doesn't mean she loves her mother any less. That realization doesn't happen overnight. It comes slowly, through conversations, mistakes, and moments where Sophie is forced to confront her own emotions. Her friendships become especially important during this part of the story. They give her a connection to normal teenage life. They don't always understand everything she is experiencing, but they help remind her that she doesn't have to face every moment alone. There are still jokes. There are still awkward conversations. There are still little arguments and misunderstandings. And those moments are important because the movie never treats Sophie as if her entire identity has suddenly become her mother's illness. She is still a teenager. She still has dreams, insecurities, friendships, and feelings that have nothing to do with cancer. That balance makes her journey feel much more real. At one point, Sophie has to confront the possibility that the musical might not go exactly as planned. The pressure surrounding the performance has been building for weeks, and everyone involved wants the final result to be perfect. But Sophie has started to realize that life rarely works that way. You can prepare for something for months and still have something unexpected happen. You can know every line and still forget one. You can rehearse every song and still become nervous when hundreds of eyes are watching. And sometimes the biggest mistake you make isn't the thing people remember. What people remember is how you recover. That becomes a powerful idea for Sophie because she is also learning how to recover from the unexpected changes in her personal life. She can't make everything normal again. She can't go back to the moment before she learned about her mother's cancer, but she can decide how she wants to move forward. As the final rehearsals approach, the atmosphere at school becomes more intense. Everyone is focused on the same goal. Costumes are being prepared. Music is being practiced again and again. The cast members are trying to remember every detail. Sophie is surrounded by excitement, but inside she is carrying something much heavier. And yet, something changes. Instead of trying to hide everything she feels, she begins allowing herself to experience it. When she is happy, she allows herself to be happy. When she is scared, she admits that she is scared. When she needs someone, she reaches out. That might sound simple, but for Sophie, it is a huge step, because for much of the story, she has been trying to be strong for everyone else. Now she begins to understand that she doesn't have to pretend she is okay every second of the day. Being vulnerable doesn't make her weak. It makes her human. The relationship between Sophie and Elizabeth also becomes deeper as they begin communicating more honestly. Instead of avoiding difficult subjects, they slowly begin talking about what they are both afraid of. Those conversations aren't easy. Sometimes there are tears, sometimes there is silence, and sometimes neither of them knows what to say. But even the silence becomes meaningful because they are together. For Sophie, that may be one of the most important lessons of all. She has spent so much time looking for the perfect words that she forgets that sometimes simply being there is enough. Her mother doesn't need Sophie to fix everything. She just needs her daughter. And Sophie doesn't need her mother to promise that everything will be okay. She needs to know that they can face whatever comes next together. As opening night finally approaches, Sophie begins thinking less about whether she will be perfect and more about what she wants the performance to mean. She wants her mother to see her. She wants her friends to see her. But most importantly, she wants to see herself clearly. She wants to know that she didn't let fear take away something she loved. That becomes the real reason she steps onto the stage. Not to prove that she is the best, not to win everyone's approval, but to remind herself that even during a difficult chapter of her life, there can still be moments of beauty. The night of the performance arrives faster than she expects. Backstage, everything feels different. The same stage she has practiced on countless times suddenly looks unfamiliar. The lights seem brighter. The sounds from the audience feel louder. Her heart is racing. For a moment, all of the confidence she has built begins to disappear. This is the exact moment she has been preparing for. But preparation doesn't stop the nerves. She thinks about her mother. She thinks about everything that has happened. She thinks about the person she was when she first auditioned. And she realizes just how much has changed. The girl who walked into that audition wanted a role. The girl standing backstage now wants something completely different. She wants to live in the moment. She wants to stop being afraid of every possible tomorrow. She wants to appreciate the people she loves while they are beside her. And, maybe most importantly, she wants to stop believing that she has to choose between being there for her family and being herself. When her cue finally comes, Sophie takes a breath. The curtain begins to move. The lights come up. And for the first time in weeks, she doesn't think about what could go wrong. She simply steps forward. Because sometimes the bravest thing you can do isn't defeating your fear. It's walking onto the stage while you're still afraid. And Sophie is finally ready to do exactly that. The moment Sophie steps onto the stage, everything around her seems to disappear. The noise from backstage fades away. The nervous conversations are gone, and for a few seconds, there is nothing except the lights, the music, and the audience in front of her. This is the moment she has imagined for so long. but it doesn't feel exactly the way she expected. When Sophie first started preparing for the musical, she believed the biggest challenge would be proving that she deserved the role. She wanted to show everyone that she could handle the pressure and that she belonged on that stage. Now, standing in front of the audience, she realizes that she isn't trying to prove anything anymore. She is simply there. And somehow, that makes the performance more powerful. Sophie begins the scene, and the nerves that were overwhelming her backstage slowly start to disappear. She knows the movements. She knows the music. She knows what comes next. Her body seems to remember everything even when her mind is still catching up, for the first time in a long while. Sophie isn't thinking about the future. She isn't wondering what the next doctor's appointment will bring. She isn't thinking about whether her mother is going to get better. She isn't worrying about what might happen tomorrow. She is completely present, and that is something she has been struggling to do throughout the story. The performance also gives her something that everyday life hasn't been able to give her: control. In real life, Sophie has had almost no control over the situation surrounding her family. But on this stage, she knows what she can do. She can perform. She can give everything she has to the moment. As the musical continues, Sophie becomes more confident. The fear that followed her onto the stage doesn't completely disappear, but it stops controlling her. And that difference matters. Being brave doesn't mean you stop being scared. It means you stop allowing fear to decide what you do. Sophie has finally reached that point. Backstage, the other students are watching and waiting for their own moments. Some are nervous. Some are excited. Everyone knows that the performance has been building toward this night. For Sophie's friends, seeing her perform is also emotional. They know what she has been dealing with, even if they haven't experienced it themselves. They know how much this opportunity means to her. And somewhere in the audience, Elizabeth is watching her daughter. That detail makes the performance even more meaningful. Sophie isn't performing for applause anymore. She is performing for the people who helped her get there. She is performing for the version of herself who used to dream about this moment. And she is performing because she finally understands that life doesn't have to be perfect for a moment to be beautiful. As the musical continues, there are small moments when Sophie's emotions almost overwhelm her. Something about a line, a song, or simply seeing her mother in the audience reminds her of everything that has happened. For a second, she almost loses herself, but then she keeps going. That is perhaps the biggest difference between the Sophie we saw earlier and the Sophie standing on the stage now. Earlier, she wanted to escape difficult emotions. Now, she understands that she can carry them. She doesn't have to pretend that everything is okay. She doesn't have to forget what her family is going through. She can feel sadness and still perform. She can be afraid and still smile. She can love her mother deeply and still enjoy being a teenager. Those emotions don't cancel each other out. They can exist at the same time. And that is one of the central ideas the movie keeps returning to. Life isn't always divided into happy moments and sad moments. Sometimes they happen together. Sometimes the happiest memory of your life can exist during the hardest period of your life. Sophie is beginning to understand that. The audience, of course, doesn't know everything happening inside her mind. From their perspective, she is simply performing her role. They see the confidence, the movement, the emotion, and the energy. They don't see the battle that happened backstage. They don't see the fear she carried into the theater. They don't know that every successful moment on the stage represents something much bigger for Sophie. And perhaps that is exactly how life works. We often see people during their strongest moments without knowing what they had to overcome before reaching them. Sophie's performance becomes a reminder of that. As the final sections of the musical approach, the entire cast begins moving toward the ending they have rehearsed countless times. Every person has a role to play. Every piece of music has a place. Every movement has been practiced. And Sophie knows that soon it will all be over. That thought makes her emotional because she realizes she doesn't want the moment to end, not because the musical itself is perfect, but because she finally feels free. For those few hours, she has been able to step away from the uncertainty surrounding her family. She has been able to breathe. She has been able to laugh. She has been able to be Sophie again. When the final moments arrive, she gives the performance everything she has. There is no holding back. There is no worrying about whether people will approve. There is no trying to become the perfect version of herself. She simply gives an honest performance, and when the final moment arrives, The audience reacts. The applause fills the theater. For Sophie, the sound means more than she could have imagined. It isn't simply applause for a school musical. It feels like recognition, not necessarily recognition from the audience, but recognition from herself. She has made it through something incredibly difficult. She didn't have all the answers. She didn't know what the future would bring, but she kept going. When Sophie finally leaves the stage, the adrenaline begins to fade. The excitement is replaced by a strange mixture of relief and sadness. It's over. The moment she spent weeks preparing for is now behind her. But unlike earlier in the story, she doesn't immediately start worrying about what comes next. Instead, she allows herself to enjoy what just happened. Her friends celebrate. The atmosphere backstage becomes lighter. Everyone is talking about the performance, and Sophie gets the chance to simply be surrounded by people who care about her. Then comes one of the most important moments of the night. Sophie reconnects with her mother. There doesn't need to be some huge speech explaining everything they have been through. Their relationship has already said enough. Elizabeth has watched her daughter step onto that stage despite everything happening in their lives, and Sophie has seen that her mother was there. That matters, because sometimes the most meaningful support isn't a dramatic conversation. It's showing up. It's sitting in the audience. It's being there when someone takes a risk. It's letting them know that you are proud of them. For Sophie, seeing her mother there confirms something she has slowly been learning throughout the story. She doesn't have to choose between loving her family and living her own life. She can do both, and maybe that's the real meaning behind her entire journey. The musical wasn't a way to escape reality forever. It was a reminder that reality can still contain moments worth holding onto. As the night comes to an end, Sophie is left with the same uncertainty she had before the performance. Her mother's situation hasn't magically disappeared. The future is still unknown, but Sophie has changed. She is no longer waiting for life to become perfect before allowing herself to live. She understands that some things are outside her control, and instead of spending every moment fearing what might happen, she is learning to appreciate what is happening right now. The stage lights eventually go dark. The theater becomes quiet. The audience goes home. But for Sophie, the performance doesn't really end when the curtain closes. It becomes a memory she will carry with her, a reminder of the person she was, the person she became, and the people who stood beside her when life became difficult. And perhaps most importantly, she learns that growing up doesn't mean becoming someone who never gets scared. It means becoming someone who can feel fear and still move forward. Sophie has spent much of the story trying to figure out what comes next. Now, for the first time, she doesn't need to know. She can simply take the next step, and whatever happens after this, she knows one thing for certain. She isn't the same girl who walked into that first audition. She has already grown beyond the role she once thought would define her. After the performance, Sophie finally gets a chance to slow down. For weeks, her life has felt like it was moving from one stressful moment to another. School, rehearsals, family, friendships, and her mother's health have all been competing for space in her mind. Now, for the first time in a while, there is nothing she needs to prepare for the next morning. The musical is finished, but Sophie quickly discovers that finishing something doesn't always mean the emotions surrounding it disappear. There is a strange quietness after a major event. When you've spent so much time preparing for one particular day, you almost expect life to feel completely different once that day arrives. Sophie had imagined opening night so many times, but she hadn't really imagined the morning after. There are no rehearsals to attend, no lines to memorize. No costume waiting for her. No countdown. And without all of that noise, the thoughts she had been keeping busy to avoid begin coming back. Her mother's situation is still there. The uncertainty is still there. And Sophie still doesn't know exactly what the future is going to look like. But something inside her has changed. Earlier, uncertainty made her feel helpless. Now, she understands that she doesn't have to know everything immediately. That may sound like a small realization, but for someone like Sophie, it is a major step forward. She has spent much of her life believing that preparation could protect her from failure. If she practiced enough, studied enough, rehearsed enough, and tried hard enough, she could make things work. But life has shown her something different. Sometimes you can do everything right and still face something you never expected. That doesn't mean your effort was pointless. It simply means that life isn't a performance where everything goes according to the script. Sophie begins looking back at everything that happened with a different perspective. At the beginning, she saw the musical as an opportunity to prove herself. She wanted the role because she wanted recognition. She wanted to know that she was talented enough and confident enough to stand in front of everyone. But now she realizes that the role gave her something much more important. It gave her a place where she could process everything she was feeling. The stage became a place where she could express emotions she didn't always know how to explain in normal conversations. And that is why the experience matters so much to her. It wasn't about becoming famous. It wasn't about being the best student in the theater program. It wasn't even about getting applause. It was about discovering something about herself. Sophie also begins seeing her friends differently. During the hardest parts of the story, they weren't always able to understand exactly what she needed. Sometimes their attempts to help may have felt awkward. Sometimes they probably said the wrong thing. But Sophie starts realizing that expecting people to have perfect answers is unfair. Her friends are teenagers too. They are learning how to deal with difficult situations just like she is. Sometimes support doesn't look like a dramatic conversation. Sometimes it's simply someone sitting beside you without asking you to explain everything. Sometimes it's a joke at exactly the right moment. Sometimes it's a message asking whether you're okay. And sometimes it's someone showing up when you didn't even ask them to. Sophie becomes more willing to accept that kind of support. That is another sign that she is growing. She doesn't feel like she has to carry everything alone anymore. At home, things are more complicated. The reality of her mother's illness is impossible to ignore, and Sophie still has moments when fear takes over. There are days when she feels hopeful and days when she struggles to stay positive, but she begins to understand that hope doesn't mean pretending that everything will definitely be fine. Hope can simply mean continuing to believe that tomorrow is worth reaching. That distinction becomes important. Sophie doesn't need a guarantee about the future. She needs the courage to live without one. Her relationship with Elizabeth also continues changing. There is a new honesty between them now. They don't always talk about difficult things, but when they do, Sophie is less likely to run away from the conversation. She begins asking questions. She begins listening. And most importantly, she begins understanding that her mother has fears of her own. For a long time, Sophie saw Elizabeth primarily as her mother, someone who was supposed to know what to do. Someone who was supposed to make difficult situations feel less frightening. But now Sophie sees the person behind that role. Elizabeth is scared too. She has hopes. She has worries. She has moments when she doesn't know what to say. And seeing that doesn't make Sophie feel less safe. In some ways, it makes their relationship stronger. Because Sophie no longer expects her mother to be invincible. She simply wants her to be there. And Elizabeth doesn't expect Sophie to be perfect. She wants her daughter to live. That understanding gives Sophie permission to move forward. She begins thinking about what she wants after the musical. Maybe theater will continue to be a major part of her life. Maybe it will become something she remembers fondly years later. She doesn't know yet. And for once, she is okay with not knowing. There is something refreshing about that. At the beginning of the story, Sophie was focused on one specific outcome. She wanted a particular role and believed that getting it would prove something about who she was. By this point, she understands that one achievement cannot define an entire person. Getting the role didn't make her valuable. Performing well didn't make her valuable. And struggling didn't make her a failure. She was already enough before any of those things happened. That lesson may be one of the most important things Sophie takes away from the experience. The movie also makes it clear that growing up isn't a straight line. There are moments when Sophie feels mature and confident, followed by moments when she becomes overwhelmed again. She can handle one difficult conversation and then completely lose her composure over something small. She can feel hopeful in the morning and frightened by the evening. But that doesn't mean she is going backward. It simply means she is human. Healing and growing don't happen in a perfectly organized sequence. Sometimes you take 2 steps forward and 1 step back. Sometimes you think you've accepted something, only to discover that you're still angry about it. And sometimes a memory can bring back an emotion you thought you'd already dealt with. Sophie begins accepting that too. Instead of judging herself every time she struggles, she gives herself permission to feel whatever she is feeling. That makes her stronger. Not because the fear disappears, but because she no longer spends all of her energy fighting against it. She can acknowledge it and keep moving. There is also a subtle change in how Sophie views the people around her. Before, she was often focused on how they saw her. Was she talented enough? Was she confident enough? Did people like her? Did she belong? Now those questions don't seem quite as important. She has discovered that the people who genuinely matter aren't going to disappear just because she has a bad day or makes a mistake. That realization gives her a different kind of confidence. Not the confidence of someone who believes they can control everything. The confidence of someone who knows they can survive things they cannot control. And that is much more valuable. As Sophie returns to ordinary school life, everything looks familiar, but she doesn't feel exactly the same. The hallways are the same. The classrooms are the same. Her friends are still talking about the same teenage problems. But Sophie is carrying a new perspective with her. She knows now that ordinary days can become important memories without warning. A normal conversation with someone you love can become something you remember for years. A simple performance can become one of the moments that changes how you see yourself. And a difficult period in your life can teach you things that no classroom ever could. Sophie doesn't know where her journey will eventually take her. She doesn't know exactly what will happen with her family. She doesn't know what the next chapter will look like. But she no longer feels the same desperate need to have every answer. For the first time, she is comfortable taking life one moment at a time. And maybe that's what the entire experience was trying to teach her. You don't always get to choose the story you're given. You don't always get to decide when the difficult chapter begins. But you can choose how honestly you live through it. You can keep loving people. You can keep dreaming. You can keep laughing. You can keep showing up. And sometimes, when everything feels uncertain, simply continuing forward is its own kind of courage. Sophie has learned that lesson the hard way, but she has learned it. And as she looks toward whatever comes next, she isn't waiting for life to become perfect before she allows herself to enjoy it. She is finally ready to live it as it comes. Sophie's life begins settling into a new rhythm after the musical, but the emotional impact of everything she has experienced doesn't simply disappear. In fact, once the excitement of the performance fades, she starts noticing how much the experience has changed the way she looks at ordinary moments. Before all of this happened, Sophie often thought about the future as if it were something she could carefully plan. She had ideas about theater, school, friendships, and the person she wanted to become. Now she understands that life can completely change direction without asking permission first. That realization is both frightening and strangely freeing. She no longer feels the same pressure to have everything figured out. At school, her friends begin returning to their normal routines. Conversations shift back toward everyday teenage problems. People talk about upcoming assignments, weekend plans, relationships, and whatever new drama has appeared among their classmates. Sophie listens to all of it, and sometimes she laughs along. There is something comforting about normality. After spending so much time thinking about serious things, being able to complain about homework or laugh at something stupid with a friend feels almost like a luxury. She realizes that ordinary life isn't actually boring. Ordinary life is precious. That becomes one of the quiet lessons she takes from everything that has happened. Before her mother's diagnosis returned, Sophie probably didn't think twice about sitting at the kitchen table with her family, or having a casual conversation after school. Now those moments carry a different weight. She pays attention. She listens more carefully. She notices the little things. And sometimes she catches herself wishing she could freeze time. But she knows she can't. The future is still moving forward whether she is ready for it or not. At home, Elizabeth continues dealing with her treatment and everything that comes with it. There are good days and difficult days. Some days feel almost normal, while others remind Sophie just how serious the situation is. Sophie has learned not to judge a day by whether it was completely good or completely bad. A difficult day can still contain a beautiful moment. A happy day can still contain fear. Nothing is completely one thing anymore. That emotional complexity is something Sophie has become much better at understanding. She also starts becoming more honest with herself about her fears. Earlier, she tried to push those fears away because she thought being afraid would make everything harder. Now she realizes that acknowledging fear can actually make it easier to deal with. If she misses her mother, she says it. If she's worried, she admits it. If she's angry, she doesn't automatically blame herself for feeling that way. Those emotions don't make her ungrateful. They don't make her weak. They simply show how much she cares. Her relationship with her friends continues developing as well. Sophie is no longer trying so hard to hide the difficult parts of her life. She doesn't tell everyone everything, but she becomes more comfortable letting people know when she needs support. That change may seem small from the outside, but for Sophie it is enormous. She spent so much time believing that being strong meant handling everything alone. Now she understands that sometimes strength looks completely different. Sometimes strength is saying, "I need you." Sometimes it is allowing yourself to cry. Sometimes it is admitting that you don't know what you're doing. And sometimes it is trusting someone enough to let them see you when you're not okay. Sophie begins doing those things. And because she does, her friendships become more genuine. She doesn't have to pretend to be happy all the time. Her friends don't have to pretend they know exactly what to say. They can simply be there for one another. That feels more real than any perfect friendship ever could. Meanwhile, Sophie starts thinking about theater again. The musical is over, but the passion that brought her to the stage hasn't disappeared. If anything, it has become stronger. She begins asking herself what performing really means to her. Is it about attention? Is it about getting a big role? Is it about proving that she is talented? Or is it something deeper? Sophie now knows the answer. Theater gives her a way to communicate feelings that are sometimes difficult to put into ordinary words. When she performs, she can take complicated emotions and turn them into something other people can understand. That doesn't mean every performance will be perfect. It doesn't mean she will always get the role she wants. It doesn't even mean she will definitely pursue theater forever. But she knows that the stage has become an important part of who she is. And she doesn't want to give that up simply because life became difficult. In fact, she begins seeing the difficult period differently. Maybe it didn't destroy her dream. Maybe it showed her why the dream mattered. That is a huge shift in perspective. Before, Sophie wanted the musical to prove something about her future. Now she understands that the experience already gave her something valuable, regardless of what happens next. It gave her memories. It gave her confidence. It gave her friendships. And most importantly, it gave her a better understanding of herself. At home, Sophie and Elizabeth have more moments where they simply spend time together without talking about illness. They watch something. They eat together. They joke. They argue over small things. And those ordinary moments become some of the most meaningful parts of Sophie's life. Because now she understands that love isn't always expressed through huge speeches. Sometimes love is making someone's favorite meal. Sometimes it's asking how their day went. Sometimes it's sitting beside them in silence. Sometimes it's simply being there. Sophie begins noticing those things more than she used to. She also becomes more aware of her own responsibility. Not responsibility for her mother's health, because that is something she cannot control, but responsibility for how she chooses to live. She realizes that she cannot spend every day waiting for bad news. If she does, she will miss the good moments that are happening right in front of her. That doesn't mean she stops worrying. It means she refuses to let worrying consume everything. This becomes a delicate balance. Sophie still has difficult nights. There are moments when she lies awake thinking about the future. She wonders what will happen. She wonders whether things will get better. She wonders how much more her family will have to go through. There are no easy answers, but instead of trying to force an answer, she starts reminding herself of something her experience has already taught her. She doesn't have to know everything today. Tomorrow will arrive when it arrives. And when it does, she will deal with it then. That mindset allows her to enjoy her present life more fully. She starts noticing small things she once ignored. The sound of her friends laughing in the hallway. The excitement of discovering a new song. A quiet conversation with her mother. The feeling of walking home after school when she has nowhere urgent to be. None of these moments seem important when you're living them. But Sophie now understands that these are the moments life is actually made of. Not the huge achievements, not the perfect days, the little moments between them, and perhaps that is why the title of the movie becomes more meaningful as Sophie's journey continues. Don't say good luck sounds like a simple phrase connected to theater, but for Sophie, luck has become something much bigger. She has learned that you cannot rely on luck to make everything work out. You can't control every outcome. You can't guarantee that people will stay healthy forever. You can't guarantee that every dream will come true. What you can do is show up. You can prepare. You can love people. You can take chances. You can keep going. And when life surprises you, you can decide how you will respond. Sophie isn't fearless now. She simply understands that fear doesn't have to stop her. That is the difference between the girl we met at the beginning and the person she is becoming. She no longer needs life to promise her that everything will be okay before she takes another step. She can move forward without that promise, and as she looks toward the next chapter of her life, she begins to understand that growing up isn't about finding all the answers. It's about learning how to live with the questions. Some questions may never have simple answers. Some fears may never completely disappear. Some memories may always hurt, but there can still be happiness alongside them. There can still be laughter. There can still be dreams. There can still be a stage waiting for her. And Sophie is finally beginning to understand that she doesn't have to choose between remembering the difficult moments and enjoying the good ones. She can carry both. That is what makes her journey feel so personal. She isn't becoming a completely different person. She is becoming a more honest version of herself. And whatever happens next, she is ready to face it without pretending that she has everything under control. Because now she knows something she didn't know before. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is simply keep living while the future remains uncertain. As Sophie continues moving forward, she begins to understand that the biggest changes in her life aren't always the ones other people can see. There is no dramatic announcement at school telling everyone that she has changed. Her friends still recognize her. Her daily routine still looks familiar. But inside, Sophie has developed a different way of looking at everything around her. She no longer takes ordinary moments for granted. That doesn't mean she suddenly becomes serious all the time. In fact, one of the things she learns is that she doesn't have to stop being herself just because her family is facing something difficult. She can still joke with her friends. She can still get excited about theater. She can still have embarrassing teenage moments and worrying about things that seem insignificant compared with everything happening at home. Those things are still part of her life. And Sophie finally understands that being worried about her mother doesn't mean she has to stop living her own life. This becomes especially important when she starts thinking about what she wants to do next. The musical has finished, but her passion for performing hasn't disappeared. If anything, the experience has made her more determined to continue. She starts looking at theater differently. Before, she saw it mostly as a place where she could prove herself. Now, she sees it as a place where she can connect with people. A performance doesn't have to be perfect to matter. A story doesn't have to solve every problem to be meaningful. And a person doesn't have to be completely okay before they can create something beautiful. Those ideas begin influencing the way Sophie approaches her future. She also realizes that the people around her are changing too. Her friends are growing up alongside her, even if they don't always realize it. Everyone is beginning to think about what comes after high school, and those conversations bring a new kind of uncertainty. Some people seem to know exactly what they want. Others have no idea. Sophie used to feel pressure to have an answer. Now she doesn't. She has learned that uncertainty isn't automatically a bad thing. Sometimes uncertainty simply means there are possibilities you haven't discovered yet. That is a much healthier way for Sophie to look at the future. Instead of asking herself exactly where she will be years from now, she starts asking a simpler question: what matters to me right now? And the answer is clear. Her family matters. Her friends matter. The things she loves matter. And the people who have stood beside her matter. This change also affects how she handles conflict. Earlier in the story, when something went wrong, Sophie could become defensive or emotional. She was already carrying so much internally that even small disagreements could feel overwhelming. Now she tries to pause. She listens. She thinks before reacting. She doesn't always succeed. Sometimes she still gets angry. Sometimes she still says something she wishes she could take back. But she catches herself more quickly. That's another sign of growing up. Maturity isn't never making mistakes. It's recognizing your mistakes and deciding to do better. Sophie begins doing exactly that. Her relationship with Elizabeth also becomes more honest. There are still difficult conversations, but Sophie isn't afraid of them in the same way anymore. She understands that avoiding a painful subject doesn't make it disappear. Talking about it may hurt, but sometimes the pain of an honest conversation is better than the fear created by silence. Elizabeth also begins encouraging Sophie to think about her own future. That creates another emotional conflict because Sophie sometimes worries that focusing on herself is selfish. Her mother doesn't see it that way. She wants Sophie to have dreams. She wants her daughter to make plans. She wants her to think about the future without feeling guilty. And Sophie slowly begins accepting that permission. She doesn't need to apologize for being young. She doesn't need to apologize for wanting happiness. She doesn't need to apologize for having dreams. Her mother's situation doesn't erase Sophie's future. If anything, it reminds Sophie that she should appreciate the opportunity to have one. There are moments when Sophie wishes she could protect Elizabeth from everything. She wishes she could take away the fear. She wishes she could somehow guarantee that her mother would be okay. But she can't. And accepting that is one of the hardest things she has ever had to do. For a while, Sophie may have believed that if she could just be strong enough, positive enough, or helpful enough, she could somehow make things better. Now she understands that love doesn't always mean fixing something. Sometimes love means staying. Sometimes it means listening. Sometimes it means letting someone know that they don't have to face a difficult moment alone. That understanding changes the way Sophie supports her mother. Instead of trying to act like she has all the answers, she becomes comfortable simply being her daughter. They can have normal conversations. They can laugh. They can disagree. They can have moments where neither of them talks about the illness. Those moments become incredibly valuable because they remind them that their relationship is bigger than the problem they are facing. The illness is part of their lives. It isn't their entire lives. Sophie starts understanding that distinction at school. She also begins noticing how differently people respond to difficult situations. Some people avoid talking about uncomfortable things. Others talk too much. Some want to help but don't know how. And some simply don't know what to say. Sophie becomes less judgmental about these reactions because she has learned that fear affects everyone differently. There is no perfect way to respond when someone you care about is hurting. The important thing is the intention behind the response. That makes Sophie more patient with people. It also makes her more willing to forgive. She realizes that everyone is trying to figure things out, and sometimes people make mistakes while doing that. This becomes especially meaningful in her friendships. Rather than expecting her friends to understand everything automatically, she starts explaining what she needs. If she wants to talk, she says so. If she wants a distraction, she says so. If she needs space, she says so. That honesty prevents misunderstandings from growing into bigger problems. It also gives her friends a chance to support her in a way that actually helps. Sophie is learning that communication isn't about finding perfect words. It's about being honest enough to let people understand you. Meanwhile, the memory of the musical remains with her. She sometimes thinks about the night of the performance and remembers how nervous she was before walking onto the stage. She remembers the lights. She remembers the audience. She remembers seeing her mother. And she remembers the strange feeling of being completely present. That memory becomes something she can return to whenever life feels overwhelming. Not because the performance solved anything. It didn't. But because it reminded her that she was capable of moving forward even when she was afraid. That is a powerful memory to carry. Sophie begins realizing that courage isn't something you have once and keep forever. You have to choose it again and again. Every difficult conversation requires courage. Every new opportunity requires courage. Every uncertain day requires courage. Sometimes even getting out of bed and continuing with normal life can require courage. Sophie now recognizes that. And because she recognizes it, she stops expecting herself to be fearless. She only expects herself to keep trying. That attitude gives her a different kind of confidence. It isn't loud. It isn't dramatic. She doesn't need everyone to know how strong she has become. She simply knows it herself. And that may be the most important kind of confidence. As the story moves deeper into this new chapter, Sophie starts thinking about the person she wants to become. She doesn't want to become someone who never feels pain. She doesn't want to become someone who hides every emotion. She doesn't want to become someone who pretends everything is fine. She wants to become someone who can experience life honestly. Someone who can love deeply without being afraid of loss. Someone who can dream without demanding guarantees. Someone who can be vulnerable without feeling ashamed. And someone who can continue moving forward even when the path isn't clear. The difficult experiences she has gone through haven't given her all the answers, but they have given her perspective. She now knows that life can change quickly. She knows that people can surprise you. She knows that plans can fall apart. But she also knows that unexpected moments can lead to beautiful memories. That is why she isn't afraid of the future in quite the same way anymore. There will still be difficult days. There will still be uncertainty. There will still be moments when she wishes she could control what happens. But Sophie now has something she didn't have before. Perspective. She knows that she doesn't need to understand the entire journey before taking the next step. And as she continues walking forward, she carries the lessons from the stage with her. The lights may have gone out. The audience may have gone home. The musical may be finished. But the confidence Sophie discovered there is still alive. She doesn't need a stage to prove who she is anymore. She simply needs to keep being herself. And for Sophie, that turns out to be the most important performance of all. Sophie's life continues moving forward, but the lessons she learned during the musical don't disappear just because the curtain has closed. If anything, the more time passes, the more she realizes that the experience changed the way she sees herself. There was a time when Sophie believed confidence meant being certain. If you knew what you wanted, knew how to get it, and didn't let anything distract you, then you were confident. Now she sees confidence differently. Sometimes confidence means admitting that you don't know what happens next and still choosing to move forward. That is where Sophie is now. She has stopped trying to create a perfect version of her life. Instead, she is beginning to accept that some things will always be unpredictable. Her mother's health remains something she cannot control, and there are still moments when that reality scares her. But fear no longer completely controls her. She can feel worried and still go to school. She can have a difficult morning and still meet her friends. She can think about her family and still enjoy theater. She can have a bad day without believing that everything is falling apart. That balance is something she had never really understood before. One of the biggest changes is the way Sophie sees happiness. Earlier, she sometimes felt guilty whenever she enjoyed herself. If she was laughing while her mother was dealing with something serious, part of her wondered whether she should be doing something else. Now she understands that happiness isn't disrespectful. A happy moment doesn't erase a painful one. A laugh doesn't mean you have forgotten. Enjoying an afternoon with your friends doesn't mean you care any less about your family. In fact, those moments can give you the strength to face the difficult ones. Sophie begins allowing herself to experience happiness without apologizing for it. That makes her feel lighter. She also becomes more comfortable with the idea that she doesn't have to hide her emotions from everyone. There are still things she keeps private, but she isn't afraid to admit when she is struggling. If she needs to cry, she cries. If she needs to talk, she talks. If she needs a little time alone, she takes it. That emotional honesty becomes one of the strongest parts of her growth. At home, she and Elizabeth continue finding their new normal. There are days when everything feels surprisingly ordinary. Those days can almost make Sophie forget about the uncertainty surrounding them. They can sit together, talk about school, discuss everyday things, or laugh about something completely unimportant. And Sophie begins realizing how important those moments are. Not every memory has to be dramatic. Some of the most valuable memories are the quiet ones. A conversation in the kitchen, a shared joke, a simple meal, a few minutes sitting together after a long day. Sophie begins paying attention to those details because she knows that life is made from them. That awareness changes the way she treats time. She doesn't want to spend every moment worrying about what could happen. She wants to actually experience the time she has. That doesn't mean she ignores reality. It means she stops letting the possibility of a difficult future steal every good moment from the present. This mindset also changes the way she thinks about her future career. Theater remains important to her, but she no longer sees it as a test she has to pass. She doesn't need every audition to go perfectly. She doesn't need every role. She doesn't need everyone to approve of her. She simply wants to keep performing because it makes her feel connected to herself. And that is a much healthier reason to pursue something. She begins thinking about what other opportunities might exist. Maybe another school production. Maybe a new audition. Maybe something she hasn't even considered yet. The possibilities don't scare her anymore. They excite her. Sophie has learned that not knowing what comes next can actually be exciting when you stop treating uncertainty like an enemy. Her friends notice this change. She seems more relaxed. More willing to speak honestly. Less interested in impressing people. She still has insecurities, of course. Nobody suddenly becomes completely confident. But she doesn't allow those insecurities to control every decision anymore. If she wants to try something, she tries. If she makes a mistake, she learns from it. If someone doesn't like her, she doesn't automatically assume there is something wrong with her. That is another important part of growing up. You eventually realize that being liked by everyone isn't possible. And it isn't necessary. The people who matter are the ones who appreciate the real version of you. Sophie begins valuing those relationships more. She also becomes more understanding toward people who are struggling silently. Before everything happened, with her family, she might have looked at someone having a bad day and assumed they were simply in a bad mood. Now she knows that you never really know what someone is carrying. A person can smile in the hallway while dealing with something painful at home. A person can joke with friends and still be scared inside. A person can look completely normal while feeling overwhelmed. That knowledge makes Sophie more compassionate. She doesn't immediately judge people anymore. She gives them more room. And sometimes, simply giving someone that room can make a difference. There is also a growing sense that Sophie is becoming someone her younger self would have admired. The girl who once stood outside the audition room worrying about whether she was good enough would probably be surprised by who she has become. Not because Sophie has become perfect, she hasn't, but because she no longer needs perfection. She understands that being imperfect doesn't make her less valuable. It makes her real. The same thing applies to her family. Sophie stops expecting everything to look perfect. She stops expecting her mother to always be strong. She stops expecting herself to always be positive. Instead, she accepts that difficult days are part of life. And when those days come, she knows she doesn't have to face them alone. That is perhaps the most important lesson she has learned. People cannot always solve your problems, but they can help you carry them. Sophie begins understanding the difference. Sometimes she wants advice. Sometimes she wants comfort. Sometimes she just wants someone to sit with her. She becomes better at telling people which one she needs. That makes her relationship stronger because she isn't forcing people to guess anymore. Meanwhile, the memory of the musical continues giving her confidence. Whenever she feels overwhelmed, she remembers the moment before she walked onto that stage. She remembers how scared she was. She remembers thinking about everything that could go wrong. And then she remembers what happened when she simply took the first step. Nothing magically became easy. She just kept going. That memory becomes a reminder that courage often starts with something incredibly small. One step, one conversation, one decision, one attempt. You don't have to know where the entire road leads. You only have to take the next step. Sophie now applies that lesson to almost everything. When she thinks about the future, she takes one step. When she worries about her family, she focuses on today. When she feels insecure, she reminds herself of what she has already survived. And when she feels happy, she allows herself to enjoy it. That last part is especially important. For a long time, Sophie was afraid that happiness might not last. Now she understands that nothing lasts forever. That isn't necessarily a reason to be afraid. Sometimes it is the reason to appreciate something while it is here. A beautiful moment doesn't become less valuable because it eventually ends. The musical ended, but that doesn't make the experience meaningless. In fact, the fact that it ended is part of why it matters. Sophie understands that now. She doesn't need to hold on to every moment forever. She simply needs to remember it. As she continues growing, the memory of her mother's illness remains part of her story too. It is something she will never completely forget, but it no longer defines every moment. Sophie is learning to hold the difficult memories alongside the beautiful ones, the fear alongside the hope, the sadness alongside the laughter, the uncertainty alongside the excitement. And maybe that is what growing up really means. Not becoming someone who has everything figured out, but becoming someone who can carry complicated emotions without allowing them to destroy the rest of their life. Sophie is still figuring things out. She is still young. She will still make mistakes. She will still have moments of insecurity. But now she has a stronger understanding of herself. She knows what matters. She knows who matters. And she knows that she is capable of facing difficult things. The future is still unknown, but for Sophie, unknown no longer automatically means frightening. Sometimes it simply means there is a story waiting to happen. And this time, she isn't desperately trying to control every page. She is ready to turn it. Asterisk. As Sophie turns the page on everything that happened with the musical, she begins entering a part of her life where there is no single event keeping her focused. There is no opening night to prepare for anymore, no audition waiting around the corner, and no immediate goal that can distract her from everything happening at home. For the first time, she has to deal with life without having a stage to hide behind. And surprisingly, that becomes another important step in her journey. The musical had given Sophie a temporary escape. Whenever she was rehearsing, she could concentrate on something specific. There were lines to remember, songs to learn, and scenes to perform. Everything had a beginning and an ending. Real life wasn't nearly that simple. There was no script telling her what to say when she was scared. There was no director telling her what to do when she didn't know how to react. And there was certainly no guarantee that the next scene would be easier than the previous one. At first, that uncertainty bothers her. She starts thinking more deeply about the future, especially about what happens after school, her friends are beginning to talk about their own plans, and those conversations make Sophie realize that everyone is slowly moving toward a new chapter. Some people seem confident about what they want, others are still trying to figure themselves out. Sophie realizes that she belongs somewhere in the middle. She has things she loves, especially theater, but she doesn't have every detail of her future planned out. A few months earlier, that might have made her anxious. Now she sees it differently. Maybe she doesn't need to know. Maybe growing up is partly about discovering what you want by actually living instead of trying to predict everything before it happens. That idea gives Sophie a sense of freedom. She starts becoming more curious about the world around her. Instead of constantly asking whether a decision will lead to the perfect future, she begins asking whether something feels meaningful right now. That doesn't mean she becomes careless. If anything, she becomes more thoughtful. She knows that choices matter. She also knows that mistakes don't automatically ruin everything. This is another lesson she learned from performing. During rehearsals, something could go wrong and the entire cast would have to continue. Someone could miss a line, a movement could be late, or something unexpected could happen backstage. The performance didn't stop. They adapted. Sophie begins applying that same idea to life. When something goes wrong, she doesn't immediately assume everything is ruined. She looks for the next step. That ability becomes especially important at home. Elizabeth's situation remains an emotional part of Sophie's life, and there are still moments when Sophie feels overwhelmed by it. But she has stopped trying to pretend that she can control everything. She knows she can't. Instead, she focuses on what she can actually give her mother: her time, her attention, her love, her presence. Sometimes that's all she can offer. And sometimes, she discovers, that's enough. Their relationship becomes less about trying to protect each other from reality and more about sharing it. They have conversations that aren't always comfortable, but they are honest. Sophie no longer feels that she has to hide every fear because she thinks it will make things worse. Elizabeth also doesn't expect Sophie to act like an adult all the time. That is important. Because despite everything Sophie has learned, she is still young. She still wants to have fun. She still wants to laugh. She still wants to complain about school. She still gets embarrassed. She still has moments where she reacts emotionally. And that's okay. Growing up doesn't mean suddenly becoming serious about everything. It means learning when seriousness matters and when it's okay to simply be yourself. Sophie begins understanding that distinction. Her friends also become an important part of keeping her connected to normal life. They don't allow every conversation to become heavy. Sometimes they talk about completely ridiculous things. Sometimes they argue over something that won't matter a week later. Sometimes they make Sophie laugh when she didn't even realize she needed it. Those moments become a reminder that life continues even during difficult periods, and Sophie starts appreciating that instead of feeling guilty about it. She realizes that her friends don't need her to be the version of Sophie who always has everything under control. They simply want their friend. That realization allows her to relax around them. She becomes more open, more honest. And, in some ways, happier. There is also a new confidence in the way she handles disappointment. Earlier, getting something wrong could feel like a reflection of her entire identity. If she failed at something, she worried that maybe she wasn't talented enough. Now she understands that one failure doesn't define a person. A rejection doesn't erase your ability. A bad performance doesn't erase your passion. A difficult day doesn't erase your progress. That mindset is especially important for someone who wants to continue performing. Theater is full of rejection. Not everyone gets the role they want. Not every audition works out. Not every performance receives the reaction you hoped for. Sophie knows that now. And instead of being terrified of those possibilities, she becomes more willing to take the risk. She would rather try and possibly fail than avoid something she loves simply because she is afraid of disappointment. That is a major change. The girl who once needed the role to prove herself is becoming someone who can pursue the role because she genuinely enjoys the process. That difference may seem small, but it changes everything. She begins thinking about another performance, maybe another musical, maybe something completely different. The details aren't important yet. What matters is that she hasn't given up, and perhaps that's because theater has become connected to something deeper than ambition. It has become part of how Sophie understands herself. When she performs, she doesn't have to hide the complicated parts of her personality. She can explore them. She can take emotions that feel confusing in real life and turn them into something meaningful. That ability becomes a source of strength. At the same time, Sophie learns that she doesn't always need theater to express herself. She becomes more comfortable talking. She writes things down sometimes. She spends time thinking. She allows herself to sit quietly without immediately searching for a distraction. That is another sign of her growth. Earlier, silence often meant her thoughts became too loud. Now she can sit with those thoughts, not always comfortably, but without immediately running away. And when fear returns, as it inevitably does, Sophie remembers the stage. She remembers standing backstage with her heart racing. She remembers thinking she wasn't ready. Then she remembers stepping forward anyway. That memory has become something she carries with her. It reminds her that feeling unprepared doesn't necessarily mean you aren't capable. Sometimes you become ready by beginning. The same thing is true about the future. Sophie doesn't have to feel completely ready for whatever comes next. She just has to be willing to take the next step. That perspective helps her stop looking at the future as one giant decision. Instead, she sees it as a series of smaller choices, one day at a time, one opportunity at a time, one conversation at a time, one memory at a time. And that makes the future feel less overwhelming. There is still uncertainty surrounding her family. And Sophie knows that she may face difficult moments again. But she also knows something now that she didn't understand before. She has already survived uncertainty once. She has already stood on a stage while carrying something heavy inside her. She has already learned how to smile while being afraid. She has already learned that happiness and sadness can exist together. She has already learned that asking for help isn't weakness. And she has already learned that love doesn't always mean having the power to fix something. Sometimes love simply means refusing to leave. Those lessons have become part of her. They won't disappear when the story moves into its next chapter. And perhaps that is why Sophie can finally look ahead without needing a promise that everything will be okay. She understands that no one can give her that promise. Life doesn't work that way, but someone can give you support. Someone can stand beside you. Someone can remind you who you are when you temporarily forget. And Sophie has discovered that she has people like that in her life. So she keeps moving. Not because she knows exactly where she is going. Not because she is no longer afraid. And not because the difficult parts are magically over. She keeps moving because she has learned that standing still and waiting for certainty won't make the future less uncertain. The only way forward is forward. And for Sophie, that means continuing to dream, continuing to love, continuing to perform, and continuing to become the person she wants to be. The stage may have been where her journey first changed, but now the real challenge is learning how to carry that courage into everyday life. And this time, there is no audience waiting to applaud her. There is only Sophie, making her choices, taking her chances, and slowly discovering that she doesn't need anyone to tell her that she is ready. She can decide that for herself. By this point, Sophie has changed in ways that even she might not fully recognize. The biggest difference isn't that she has suddenly become fearless or that she has found a perfect solution to everything happening in her life. It is much simpler than that. She has stopped waiting for life to give her permission to move forward. For a long time, Sophie believed that before she could enjoy something, she needed to know that everything else was okay. If her family was doing well, she could relax. If her future looked certain, she could make plans. If she knew exactly what was going to happen, she could finally stop worrying. But life has taught her that certainty doesn't work that way. There will always be something she cannot predict. There will always be questions without immediate answers. And there will always be moments when the best thing she can do is take whatever information she has and keep going. That realization becomes even more important as Sophie starts looking toward the future again. The idea of another performance begins coming back into her mind. She doesn't know exactly what that opportunity will look like, and she doesn't even know whether she will get the next role she wants. But unlike before, she isn't thinking about theater as a test of her worth. She simply misses it. She misses the feeling of rehearsing with other people. She misses learning a character. She misses the nervous energy before a performance. And she misses that strange moment when the lights come on and everything outside the stage seems to disappear. The difference is that now she knows why she loves it. She isn't chasing applause. She isn't trying to prove that she deserves to be noticed. She has discovered that performing gives her a way to understand emotions that sometimes feel too complicated to explain. That discovery makes her more comfortable with whatever happens next. If she gets another opportunity, she will take it. If she doesn't, she will find another one. That is a much healthier way to approach a dream. Sophie also starts realizing that the people around her have their own struggles. For so long, she has been focused on her mother's situation and her own emotional response to it, that she sometimes forgets that everyone else is carrying something too. A friend might be dealing with problems at home. Another student might be worried about their future. Someone who seems confident might secretly be terrified of failing. Someone who seems happy might be going through something nobody knows about. Sophie understands this now because she knows what it feels like to smile while carrying something heavy. That understanding makes her more compassionate. She becomes the kind of person who notices when someone is quieter than usual. She asks questions instead of immediately making assumptions. And sometimes, when someone doesn't want to talk, she simply stays nearby. She has learned that support doesn't always require a solution. Sometimes the best thing you can offer another person is the knowledge that they don't have to face a difficult moment completely alone. That lesson has come directly from her relationship with Elizabeth. Her mother never needed Sophie to magically fix everything. She needed her daughter. And Sophie is finally comfortable with that. There is something almost comforting about the simplicity of it. She doesn't need to become a doctor. She doesn't need to understand every medical detail. She doesn't need to predict the future. She can simply be present. That gives her a sense of purpose when other things feel uncertain. At the same time, Sophie begins giving herself permission to have a life outside her family situation. She spends time with friends. She thinks about school. She talks about theater. She allows herself to get excited about small things. And when guilt tries to return, she reminds herself of what she has learned. Her happiness isn't taking anything away from her mother. Her dreams aren't a betrayal. Living her life doesn't mean she loves her family less. If anything, it means she is taking seriously the very thing her mother has always wanted for her. A future, a life filled with experiences, a chance to become her own person. That understanding makes Sophie feel less trapped by guilt. She can finally separate responsibility from love. She loves her mother deeply, but she isn't responsible for controlling everything that happens to her. That distinction is painful to accept, but it is necessary. There are still moments when Sophie forgets. There are evenings when she becomes anxious again. There are times when one small reminder is enough to bring all the fear back. But now, when that happens, she doesn't treat the emotion like an enemy. She lets it come. She breathes. She talks to someone if she needs to. And eventually, she returns to whatever is in front of her. That is progress. Not perfection. Progress. Sophie also starts thinking about how much her idea of success has changed. At the beginning, success meant getting the role. Then it meant giving the perfect performance. Now success means something completely different. It means being honest with herself. It means continuing to care about the people she loves. It means having the courage to try again after disappointment. It means allowing herself to experience happiness without feeling guilty. And perhaps most importantly, it means refusing to let fear make every decision for her. That definition of success is much harder to measure. There is no trophy for it. No applause. No certificate. Nobody announces that you finally figured life out. You simply notice one day that something that used to terrify you doesn't have the same power anymore. For Sophie, that moment comes gradually. She notices it when she makes a plan without immediately thinking about everything that could go wrong. She notices it when she laughs with her friends and doesn't feel guilty afterward. She notices it when she talks openly with her mother instead of trying to protect both of them with silence. She notices it when she thinks about performing again and feels excitement instead of pressure. Those little changes add up. And together, they show how far she has come. The memory of her first major performance remains especially important because that was the moment when everything inside her finally came together. She remembers how frightened she was. She remembers how badly she wanted to run away. And she remembers stepping onto the stage anyway. Looking back, Sophie realizes that the stage didn't make her brave. She was already brave before she stepped onto it. The stage simply gave her a place to discover that. That realization changes how she sees future challenges. She doesn't need another special moment to become courageous. She can carry that courage into everyday situations, into difficult conversations, into auditions. Into friendships, into family life, into the unknown. And that is exactly what she begins doing. The future still isn't clear. Her mother's situation still brings uncertainty. Her own plans are still developing. There are still plenty of things Sophie doesn't know. But instead of seeing that uncertainty as an empty space filled with danger, she starts seeing it as an open door. There could be disappointment. There could be unexpected problems, but there could also be opportunities she hasn't even imagined yet. There could be new friendships, new performances, new experiences, new versions of herself. She doesn't know which ones will arrive. And for the first time, she doesn't feel the need to know. She simply wants to be ready to meet them. As Sophie continues through her ordinary days, she realizes something that would have seemed impossible at the beginning of her journey. Her life doesn't need to return to the way it was. She doesn't need to become the old Sophie again. That version of herself was innocent in a way she can never completely recover. But that doesn't mean she lost something valuable. She gained something to perspective, empathy, courage, and a deeper appreciation for the people she loves. She has learned that some experiences change you permanently. You don't go through them and simply return to who you were before. You carry them. You learn from them, and eventually, you find a way to keep moving without pretending they never happened. That's where Sophie is now. She isn't waiting for the perfect ending. She isn't waiting for someone to guarantee that everything will work out. She isn't waiting for luck. She is simply continuing. One day at a time, one choice at a time. One moment at a time. And maybe that is the real meaning behind everything she has experienced. Sometimes we spend so much time hoping for a lucky break that we forget how much courage it takes to keep showing up. Sophie has stopped waiting for luck. She has started trusting herself. And whatever comes next, she knows she can face it. Not because she has all the answers, but because she has finally learned that she doesn't need them. As Sophie continues with her life, there is a subtle change in the way she remembers the difficult period she has been through. At first, she thought the experience would always feel like something happening to her. Something unfair that interrupted the life she was supposed to be living. But with time, she began seeing it differently. It didn't stop her life. It became part of her life. That difference matters. Sophie is no longer constantly asking herself when things will return to normal. She understands that sometimes normal changes. You don't always get to return to the exact version of life you had before something happened. Instead, you create a new normal. And that is what she is doing. School continues. Her friendships continue. Theater remains part of her world. Her family continues dealing with its own challenges. Some days feel easy, while others bring back the fear she thought she had already overcome. But Sophie is better prepared for those moments now. She knows that one difficult day doesn't erase all the progress she has made. That lesson becomes important when she experiences another emotional setback. Something small reminds her of everything she has been trying not to think about, and suddenly the confidence she has built feels much more fragile. For a moment, she feels like she is back at the beginning. She wonders whether she has really changed at all. But then she realizes something. Progress doesn't mean you stop having difficult emotions. It means you know what to do when those emotions return. Sophie no longer believes she has to fight every feeling. She doesn't need to convince herself that she's okay when she isn't. Instead, she gives herself time. She talks to someone. She lets herself feel what she needs to feel. And eventually, the moment passes. That experience teaches her something important about strength. Strength isn't a permanent state. You don't become strong once and then stay strong forever. Sometimes you feel strong. Sometimes you don't. The important thing is learning how to find your way back. Sophie is becoming better at that. Her mother also notices the difference. Elizabeth can see that Sophie isn't trying to protect everyone from her emotions anymore. She is allowing herself to be honest. That honesty makes their relationship feel more natural. There are fewer moments where they pretend everything is fine. But strangely, that doesn't make their relationship darker. It makes it lighter. Because when you don't have to pretend, you don't have to spend all your energy maintaining the illusion. They can talk about difficult things. They can also talk about completely normal things. They can laugh. They can disagree. They can enjoy a quiet afternoon. And those ordinary moments become meaningful because both of them understand how valuable they are. Sophie also begins thinking more about the kind of person she wants to become. She doesn't want her identity to be built entirely around what happened to her family. She doesn't want people to know her only as the girl whose mother was sick. She wants to be known for her personality, her dreams, her friendships, and the things she creates. That doesn't mean she is trying to forget her family experience. She simply refuses to let one part of her life define the entire person. That becomes especially important when she thinks about theater. Performing has always given her a sense of identity, but now she understands that she doesn't need the audience to validate her. If she gets a role, she will be grateful. If she doesn't, she will continue. If a performance goes badly, she will learn. If it goes beautifully, she will enjoy it. The result no longer determines how she feels about herself. That is freedom. It means Sophie can take risks without believing that every outcome is a judgment of her worth. And taking risks becomes something she is increasingly comfortable with. She considers opportunities she might have ignored before. She speaks up more. She tries new things. She allows herself to make mistakes. Not every decision works out. Some do. Some don't. But Sophie isn't afraid of that anymore. She knows that the future isn't built from perfect decisions. It is built from experience. Sometimes you discover what you want by getting something wrong. Sometimes a disappointment points you toward something better. Sometimes a closed door simply forces you to look somewhere else. Sophie has learned to trust that process. Her friends become part of this new stage of her life too. They are changing, just like she is. Their friendships aren't always perfect, but they are more honest now. They can talk about serious things without feeling uncomfortable. They can joke without pretending nothing is wrong. And they can disagree without assuming the friendship is over. Sophie realizes that real friendship isn't about never having conflict. It's about being willing to understand each other afterward. That lesson makes her more patient. She stops expecting people to react exactly the way she would. Everyone has different fears. Everyone has different ways of dealing with problems. And sometimes someone who seems distant may actually be struggling with something they haven't explained. Sophie has learned to leave room for that possibility. This new perspective also affects how she sees herself. She is less critical of her own mistakes. When she looks back at earlier moments, she can recognize that she was doing the best she could with what she knew at the time. She doesn't need to punish her younger self for being confused. She doesn't need to wish away every decision she made. She can simply learn from them. That is another sign of maturity. Instead of constantly asking, "Why did I do that?" she begins asking, "What can I learn from it?" That question is much more useful. It allows her to move forward instead of staying trapped in regret. As time passes, the memory of the musical becomes almost like a personal landmark. There was Sophie before the performance, and there was Sophie afterward. The difference isn't obvious to everyone else, but Sophie knows it. Before that night, she thought courage meant feeling confident. After that night, she understood that courage could exist alongside fear. That realization stays with her. Whenever something new scares her, she remembers that feeling. She remembers standing behind the curtain. She remembers hearing the audience. She remembers wanting to disappear. And then she remembers taking that first step. That memory becomes proof. Proof that she can do difficult things without waiting until she feels completely ready. That is especially important as she begins thinking about life beyond school. There are bigger decisions ahead. College, career, relationships, independence. None of those things are simple. And Sophie knows that. But instead of becoming overwhelmed by the entire future, she focuses on the next decision. What matters now? What feels right? What kind of person does she want to be? Those questions are enough. She doesn't need to know where she will be 5 years from now. She only needs to keep moving in a direction that feels honest. And honesty has become one of the most important things in her life. She doesn't want to pretend anymore. Not with her friends. Not with her family. And especially not with herself. If she is scared, she wants to admit it. If she is happy, she wants to enjoy it. If she is uncertain, she wants to accept that uncertainty instead of pretending to have an answer. That honesty makes her feel more comfortable in her own skin. She is still figuring things out, but now she understands that figuring things out is not a failure. It is the process of becoming who you are. Sophie also begins recognizing how much her mother has taught her without necessarily giving her direct lessons. Elizabeth's strength isn't about pretending she isn't afraid. It's about continuing to live despite the fear. Sophie sees that now. Her mother still has difficult days, but she also finds reasons to laugh. She still makes plans. She still talks about ordinary things. She still cares about Sophie's future. That becomes an example Sophie carries with her. You can acknowledge that life is difficult without surrendering to the difficulty. You can be afraid and still make plans. You can face uncertainty and still find reasons to smile. Sophie begins practicing that philosophy in her own life. She starts making plans again, not because she knows everything will happen exactly as she hopes, but because she refuses to let uncertainty stop her from imagining a future. That is perhaps the biggest sign that she is healing. She is dreaming again, not cautiously, not apologetically, but genuinely, and this time, her dreams aren't about proving anything to anyone. They are simply hers. She wants to perform because she loves it. She wants to build relationships because people matter to her. She wants to experience new things because life is bigger than the fear she has been carrying. And she wants to continue becoming the person she discovered on that stage. Someone who can feel deeply, someone who can be afraid, someone who can still move forward. As Sophie looks toward the next chapter, she knows there will be more challenges. She knows life won't suddenly become simple, but she also knows something else now. She doesn't need a simple life, she needs a meaningful one. And meaningful lives are rarely perfect. They are messy, they are emotional, they are full of unexpected turns, but they are also full of moments that stay with you forever. Sophie has already experienced one of those moments. Now she is ready to create more, not because she knows exactly where they will lead, but because she has finally stopped being afraid of the journey itself. Sophie has reached a point where she can look back at the person she was before everything changed and recognize just how much she has grown. She hasn't become a completely different person, and that is important. She still has the same sense of humor, the same love for performing, and many of the same dreams she had before. What has changed is the way she carries those things. She no longer needs every dream to work out exactly as planned. She no longer believes one disappointment can define her. And she no longer thinks she has to choose between being there for her family and building a life of her own. That understanding gives her a sense of peace she didn't have before. Still, peace doesn't mean everything is suddenly easy. There are moments when the uncertainty surrounding her mother's health returns with full force. A difficult conversation, an unexpected change in plans, or simply a quiet evening at home can remind Sophie that the future is still unknown. And when that happens, she feels the same fear she has felt before. The difference is that she knows how to handle it now. Instead of immediately trying to escape the feeling, she lets herself experience it. Sometimes she talks to Elizabeth, sometimes she talks to a friend, sometimes she just needs to be alone for a while. What matters is that she no longer believes she has to hide. That is a huge difference from the girl we met earlier. At the beginning, Sophie was constantly trying to keep different parts of her life separate. School was one world, theater was another. Home was something she didn't always want to discuss. Now those parts of her life are connected. Her family has influenced the way she performs. Her friendships have influenced the way she communicates. Her experiences have influenced the way she sees people. And theater has given her a language for emotions that sometimes feel impossible to explain. She doesn't see those connections as problems anymore. She sees them as part of who she is. That becomes especially clear when Sophie starts thinking about another opportunity to perform. This time, she approaches it differently. She doesn't spend every second imagining what could go wrong. She doesn't obsess over whether everyone will like her. She doesn't convince herself that getting the opportunity will determine her future. She prepares, she works hard, and then she lets the result happen. That may be one of the clearest signs of her growth. She still cares about succeeding. She just doesn't need success to tell her who she is. There is a freedom in that. It allows Sophie to enjoy the process again. She enjoys rehearsing. She enjoys learning. She enjoys being around people who love theater as much as she does. And when she makes a mistake, she doesn't immediately feel like she has failed. She laughs. She tries again. She keeps going. That attitude makes the experience feel completely different from her first audition. Back then, she was desperate to prove herself. Now she is simply grateful to have the chance to participate. The difference isn't that her ambition disappeared. It became healthier. She still wants to be good. She still wants challenging roles. She still wants to improve. But she isn't willing to sacrifice her happiness just to become perfect. That lesson extends beyond theater. Sophie begins approaching school differently too. She still wants good grades, but she doesn't treat every mistake like a disaster. She understands that one bad result doesn't erase everything else she has accomplished. The same applies to relationships. If someone disagrees with her, she doesn't immediately assume they don't care about her. If a friendship becomes complicated, she doesn't automatically expect it to end. She has learned that relationships require patience. People misunderstand each other. People change. People make mistakes. And sometimes people need time. Sophie becomes more willing to give that time. Her friends also begin trusting her more because she is no longer afraid to communicate honestly. There is less guessing. Less pretending. And more direct conversation. That doesn't make every problem disappear, but it prevents small problems from becoming necessary disasters. Sophie has learned that avoiding a difficult conversation doesn't protect a relationship. Sometimes it weakens it. Honesty can be uncomfortable, but it creates something stronger. Trust. That trust becomes especially important with her mother. Elizabeth knows Sophie is still scared. Sophie knows Elizabeth is scared too, but neither one feels the need to hide those feelings anymore. They can acknowledge the fear and then continue with their day. They can have a difficult conversation and then make dinner. They can talk about the future and then laugh about something completely unrelated. That mixture of seriousness and normality becomes their new way of living. And Sophie begins appreciating it. She realizes that if every moment were focused on illness, fear would take over everything. So they protect the ordinary moments. They make space for them. They continue living. That doesn't mean they are ignoring reality. It means they refuse to let reality take away every reason to smile. Sophie begins doing the same thing with her own life. She allows herself to make plans. She allows herself to be excited. She allows herself to imagine possibilities. And she stops feeling guilty for doing so. One evening, Sophie thinks back to the first time she heard that her mother's cancer had returned. She remembers the shock, the confusion, the fear. She remembers wondering whether she was allowed to care about the musical anymore. Looking back now, she realizes how much she misunderstood happiness at the time. She thought happiness and sadness couldn't exist together. Now she knows they can. You can cry and laugh on the same day. You can be scared and excited at the same time. You can be worried about someone and still enjoy your own life. Human emotions aren't separate rooms. They overlap. They exist together. Sophie has learned to live in that space. That understanding also changes the way she thinks about the future. She no longer expects herself to become completely fearless. Instead, she wants to become adaptable. If something changes, she wants to be able to adjust. If something goes wrong, she wants to recover. If someone disappoints her, she wants to learn without becoming bitter. If an opportunity appears, she wants to be brave enough to take it. Those are the qualities she now values more than perfection. And they are qualities that will help her long after the musical is forgotten. The performance itself may have lasted only a short time, but the lessons from it continue shaping her. Sophie remembers that the audience only saw the finished performance. They didn't see the weeks of preparation. They didn't see the fear. They didn't see the moments when she doubted herself. That makes her think about life in a different way. Everyone is performing in some sense. People show the world one version of themselves while carrying another version privately. Someone may look confident while being terrified. Someone may seem happy while dealing with something painful. Someone may appear successful while questioning everything inside. Sophie knows that now. And because she knows it, she becomes less interested in judging people by what she sees on the surface. She wants to understand them. She wants to listen. She wants to give people the benefit of the doubt. That doesn't mean she allows people to treat her badly. She has also learned that boundaries matter. Caring about someone doesn't mean accepting everything they do. Being understanding doesn't mean ignoring your own feelings. Growing up means learning how to care for yourself while caring about other people. Sophie is still learning that balance, but she is getting better at it. She is becoming more confident in expressing what she needs. And that confidence isn't loud. She doesn't need to dominate a room. She doesn't need everyone to notice her. She simply trusts herself more. That may be the biggest change of all. Earlier, Sophie constantly looked outside herself for confirmation. Did she get the role? Did people like her? Was she doing the right thing? Was she making her family proud? Now she can answer some of those questions herself. She knows what matters to her. She knows what she values. She knows what kind of person she wants to be. And she knows that she will make mistakes along the way. She is okay with that, because she finally understands that becoming yourself isn't something you finish. It is something you continue doing. Every new experience adds another piece. Every mistake teaches you something. Every relationship changes you. Every difficult moment reveals something about your strength. And every happy moment reminds you why you keep going. Sophie is carrying all of those pieces now. She carries the fear. She carries the hope. She carries the memories of the stage. She carries the love she has for her mother. She carries the friendships that helped her through difficult days. And she carries a new confidence that doesn't depend on everything going according to plan. There will still be moments when she wishes life were easier. Of course there will, but she no longer believes that an easy life is the only kind worth living. She wants a life where she can feel, a life where she can love, a life where she can create, a life where she can take risks, and most importantly, a life where she doesn't have to wait for perfect circumstances before she allows herself to be happy. That is the Sophie who moves forward. Not fearless, not perfect, not certain, just ready to take another step, ready to face another day. And ready to discover what comes next without demanding that life tell her the ending first. The next chapter of Sophie's life begins quietly. There isn't one huge moment that suddenly announces that everything has changed. Instead, the change appears in small ways. She wakes up in the morning and doesn't immediately think about everything that could go wrong. She goes to school and allows herself to enjoy the day. She spends time with her friends without constantly checking her emotions. And when she comes home, she is more comfortable simply being with her family. These things may sound ordinary, but for Sophie, ordinary has become something worth appreciating. She has learned that life doesn't always change through dramatic events. Sometimes it changes because you start seeing the same things differently. The hallway at school is still the same hallway, her friends are still the same people, her home is still the same home. But Sophie isn't looking at them with the same eyes anymore. She has developed a deeper appreciation for the people who make her life feel safe. That includes her friends, who have remained beside her even when she wasn't always easy to understand. It includes the people involved in theater, who gave her a place where she could express herself. And most importantly, it includes Elizabeth, whose presence has become more meaningful to Sophie than ever. Sophie now understands that she doesn't need every conversation with her mother to be profound. Sometimes the simplest conversations matter most. They can talk about school, they can talk about food, they can complain about something silly, they can laugh at something neither of them expected to find funny. Those moments help Sophie remember that her mother is still her mother, not simply a person dealing with a serious illness. That distinction matters because Sophie has spent so much time thinking about what could happen that she sometimes forgets to enjoy what is happening. Now she is trying to change that. She makes an effort to be present. When Elizabeth speaks, Sophie listens. When her mother wants to spend time together, Sophie tries not to get distracted. And when they have a good moment, Sophie doesn't immediately worry about whether it will last. She simply enjoys it. That may be one of the hardest lessons she has learned. You cannot protect a beautiful moment by worrying about losing it. Worrying only steals the moment before it has even ended. Sophie knows this now. She still has anxious thoughts, but she doesn't give every thought control over her day. If a frightening possibility enters her mind, she reminds herself that a possibility isn't the same thing as reality. That distinction helps her stay grounded. Her friends also notice that she seems more comfortable with herself. She doesn't seem as desperate to prove that she belongs. She doesn't need every conversation to go her way. She doesn't need everyone to agree with her. She is still passionate and sometimes stubborn, but there is a new calmness underneath it. That calmness comes from experience. Sophie has already faced something she once believed would completely break her. And she discovered that even when life becomes frightening, there can still be reasons to keep going. That knowledge stays with her. It changes how she reacts to smaller problems. A bad grade doesn't feel like the end of the world. A disagreement with a friend doesn't feel like the end of the friendship. A disappointing audition doesn't feel like the end of her dreams. She has developed perspective, and perspective makes it easier to breathe. Theater continues to play an important role in this new stage of her life. Sophie becomes more interested in the process than the outcome. She enjoys rehearsing even when there is no guarantee of a big performance. She enjoys helping other people improve. She listens to feedback instead of immediately taking criticism personally. And when she sees someone else succeed, she doesn't automatically compare herself to them. She can appreciate their success without treating it as evidence of her own failure. That is another important change. Sophie is learning that someone else's success doesn't reduce her own potential. There isn't only one opportunity. There isn't only one stage. There isn't only one moment when she has to prove herself. There will be other chances. That realization makes her more generous toward other people and more patient with herself. She also starts understanding that some dreams evolve. Maybe theater will remain a major part of her future. Maybe it will become one of several passions. Maybe she will eventually discover something completely different. She doesn't know. And she is beginning to like that uncertainty. It gives her room to explore. Instead of deciding who she must become, she can discover who she actually is. That process is exciting. It can also be frightening, but Sophie is willing to accept both emotions. Her relationship with her friends changes in a similar way. They are all beginning to think about the future, and that naturally creates some distance between them. Not because they stop caring, simply because everyone is becoming their own person. Sophie used to think that growing up meant keeping everything exactly the same. Now she understands that sometimes people change without leaving each other behind. A friendship can evolve. People can take different paths. You can care about someone even when your lives no longer look identical. That understanding makes Sophie less afraid of change. She realizes that change isn't automatically loss. Sometimes change is growth. That is especially important when she thinks about her family. The future may bring changes she doesn't want, but she cannot stop time. She can only decide how she wants to experience it. So she chooses to focus on connection. She chooses to be present. She chooses to make memories instead of spending every day worrying about what memories might someday become painful. That choice doesn't eliminate fear, but it prevents fear from becoming the center of her life. Sophie also becomes more comfortable asking questions. Instead of assuming she knows what other people are thinking, she asks. Instead of trying to guess what her mother needs, she listens. Instead of assuming a friend is angry, she checks. That habit makes her relationship stronger. It also makes her more confident because she no longer spends as much time imagining problems that may not even exist. She learns that sometimes the story in your head is much worse than the reality in front of you. That lesson is useful far beyond her family situation. It applies to school, to friendships, to auditions, to almost everything. Sophie begins trusting reality more than her fears, and that trust gives her freedom. She doesn't need to prepare for every possible disaster. She doesn't need to rehearse every conversation in her head. She can simply respond when something actually happens. That is a huge change for someone who once believed preparation could protect her from uncertainty. Now she knows preparation has limits. You can prepare for a performance. You can't prepare for every emotion. You can make plans. You can't control every outcome. You can love someone deeply. You can't guarantee that life will never hurt them. But none of that makes preparation, planning, or love pointless. It simply means those things are valuable because of what they give you in the present, not because they guarantee the future. Sophie understands that now, and because she understands it, she stops asking life for guarantees. She starts asking herself different questions. Am I being honest? Am I appreciating the people around me? Am I doing something I care about? Am I allowing myself to enjoy today? Those questions become more important than knowing exactly what happens tomorrow. There are still difficult nights. There are still moments when Sophie lies awake thinking about her mother, but those nights don't feel quite as lonely anymore. She knows that fear is part of love. If you care deeply about someone, uncertainty can hurt, but that doesn't mean you should stop loving. You simply learn how to love while accepting that you cannot control everything. That is a difficult lesson, but Sophie is finally beginning to understand it. She also realizes that her mother's strength has influenced her more than she originally understood. Elizabeth hasn't taught Sophie how to eliminate fear. She has shown her how to continue living alongside it. That is perhaps the most powerful example a parent can give. Not a perfect life, not a life without pain, but a life where pain doesn't erase everything else. Sophie carries that example with her. When she feels overwhelmed, she remembers that she can still find something meaningful in the day. Maybe it is a conversation, maybe it is music, maybe it is theater. Maybe it is simply sitting with someone she loves. The moment doesn't have to be huge. It only has to be real. And Sophie has become much better at recognizing real moments. She no longer needs everything to be dramatic to feel important. That is another way she has grown. She has learned to appreciate quietness. She has learned to appreciate routine. She has learned that sometimes the most beautiful part of life is simply knowing that the people you love are sitting in the same room. And as she moves forward, she begins carrying that appreciation into every part of her life. The stage taught her how to face an audience. Her family taught her how to face uncertainty. Her friends taught her that she doesn't have to face anything alone. And Sophie herself has learned the most important lesson of all. She doesn't need to know exactly how her story ends to appreciate where she is now. The future remains open. There will be more choices, more challenges. More opportunities, more moments she can't predict. But Sophie is ready, not because she has stopped being afraid. Sophie has started to understand that moving forward doesn't mean leaving the past behind. Some memories stay with you, especially the ones connected to fear, love, and the people who changed your life. For Sophie, the experience with her mother and everything surrounding the musical has become something she carries quietly. She doesn't think about it every second anymore, but certain moments still bring it all back. A song can remind her of rehearsal. A familiar place can remind her of a conversation. Even something as simple as hearing someone talk about a parent can suddenly make her stop and think. The difference is that these memories don't completely overwhelm her anymore. They have become part of her story rather than something she is constantly trying to escape. Sophie is also beginning to realize that growing up can sometimes feel like saying goodbye to different versions of yourself. The person she was before everything happened is still inside her, but she isn't that same girl anymore. She has become more independent, more thoughtful, more willing to speak honestly, and much less afraid of admitting that she doesn't have all the answers. There was a time when Sophie believed that adults had everything figured out. She thought growing up meant eventually reaching a point where nothing could surprise you anymore. Now she knows that's not true. Adults get scared too. Parents don't always know what to say. Friends don't always know how to help. And sometimes even the strongest person in the room is quietly wondering what happens next. Knowing this doesn't make Sophie feel weaker. It makes her feel more human. She stops putting impossible expectations on herself. She doesn't have to be the perfect daughter. She doesn't have to be the perfect friend. She doesn't have to be the perfect performer. She just needs to be honest about who she is. That becomes especially important as she continues thinking about theater. Another performance gives her something to look forward to, and this time she approaches it with a completely different mindset. She still prepares seriously. She still wants to do well. She still gets nervous. But the nervousness no longer feels like evidence that she isn't ready. Instead, she recognizes it as proof that she cares. That changes the way she handles those moments before performing. Instead of trying desperately to eliminate the nerves, she accepts them. Her heart beats faster, her hands feel restless, her thoughts race. But she knows what comes next. She steps forward. That small act has become almost symbolic for Sophie. She has done it before. And now she understands that she can do it again, not only on stage, but in life. Every time she chooses honesty instead of silence, she is stepping forward. Every time she allows herself to dream again, she is stepping forward. Every time she admits that she needs someone, she is stepping forward. And every time she chooses to enjoy a good moment without worrying about tomorrow, she is stepping forward. The new performance also brings Sophie closer to people she may not have known very well before. Working together toward a common goal reminds her why she loves theater in the first place. It isn't only about the person standing under the spotlight. A performance is created by everyone. The actors, the people working backstage, the people helping with costumes, the people handling the technical side, the people who encourage each other when rehearsals go badly. Sophie becomes more aware of that. She begins appreciating the people who don't receive applause but still make everything possible. That realization reflects how she has started viewing life too. Not everything important is visible. Some of the most meaningful support happens quietly. A friend checking in, a parent waiting up, someone remembering a difficult day, someone sitting beside you without saying anything. Those small actions can mean more than a dramatic speech. Sophie understands that because she has experienced it herself. And now she wants to offer that same kind of support to other people. When one of her friends is having a difficult time, Sophie doesn't immediately try to solve the problem. She listens. She asks what they need. Sometimes they don't know. That's okay too. She has learned that not every problem needs an immediate solution. Some things simply need time. This is something Sophie has had to learn for herself. She wanted answers about her mother's situation. She wanted certainty. She wanted someone to tell her exactly what would happen. But life doesn't always provide that. So now she has become more comfortable with waiting. Not passive waiting. Not giving up. Just understanding that some answers arrive only when they are ready. That patience changes her. She becomes less reactive, less anxious about every small change, and more capable of staying calm when things don't go according to plan. There is still a part of Sophie that wishes she could control everything. That part hasn't disappeared, but she recognizes it now. When she feels herself becoming overwhelmed, she asks a simple question. Is this something I can control? If the answer is yes, she does something about it. If the answer is no, she tries to let it go. It sounds simple, but for Sophie it represents a major shift. She has spent so much time trying to predict the future that learning to live in the present feels almost like a new skill. And slowly, she becomes better at it. She notices more. She listens more. She laughs more. She spends less time imagining disasters and more time experiencing actual life. That doesn't mean she has forgotten about the difficult possibilities. She simply refuses to give them every minute of her attention. Her relationship with Elizabeth benefits from that change. Their conversations become more natural. There are still moments when the subject of health comes up, but it isn't the only thing they discuss. They talk about Sophie's plans. They talk about theater. They talk about school. They talk about things that happen during the day. They laugh together. And those ordinary conversations remind Sophie that her mother is not defined by what she is going through. She is still Elizabeth. Still the person Sophie knows. Still the person who can make her laugh. Still the person who worries about her daughter. Still the person who wants Sophie to have a future. That realization helps Sophie stop looking at every moment through the lens of fear. She can simply be her mother's daughter. And that relationship becomes one of the strongest sources of comfort in her life. At the same time, Sophie begins to understand that her mother's love also means letting her grow. Elizabeth doesn't want Sophie to spend her entire future worrying about her. She wants her daughter to have experiences. To travel. To study. To perform. To fall in love. To make mistakes. To discover who she is. And Sophie finally understands that pursuing those things isn't abandoning her family. It is living. That realization removes another layer of guilt. She can love her mother and still choose herself sometimes. She can be there for her family and still chase her dreams. Those two things don't have to compete. They can exist together. This becomes one of the most important lessons Sophie carries into the next stage of her life. She doesn't need to divide herself into separate versions. She can be the daughter. The friend. The performer. The student. And simply Sophie, all at the same time. That sense of identity makes her feel stronger. She begins looking toward the future with more curiosity than fear. She doesn't know exactly what will happen after school. She doesn't know whether theater will become her career. She doesn't know where her friendships will lead. She doesn't know what challenges her family may face, but she has stopped demanding those answers immediately. There is something exciting about leaving some pages blank. A story would be boring if you already knew every scene before it happened. Sophie understands that now. The unknown can be frightening, but it can also be beautiful. There are possibilities waiting for her that she can't see yet. New people. New places. New opportunities. New versions of herself. She doesn't have to force them into existence. She simply has to remain open to them. And when fear tells her that she isn't ready, she remembers the stage. She remembers the lights. She remembers the audience. She remembers that moment when she wanted to turn around but didn't. That memory is no longer just about a performance. It has become a reminder of who she is. Someone who can be scared and still move. Someone who can hurt and still love. Someone who can face uncertainty without giving up. And perhaps that is the real transformation Sophie has gone through. She hasn't learned how to guarantee a happy ending. She has learned how to continue living without one. She has learned that happiness doesn't require certainty. Love doesn't require control. And courage doesn't require fearlessness. Sometimes courage is simply saying yes to another day. Another opportunity. Another conversation. Another dream. Another chance to be present. Sophie doesn't know what the next chapter will bring, but for once, she isn't desperate to find out. She is ready to let it arrive. And when it does, she will meet it the same way she has learned to meet everything else. With fear when fear is necessary. With hope when hope is possible. With love whenever she can give it. And with the quiet confidence that, whatever happens, she will keep moving forward. By now, Sophie has reached a point where the things that once felt impossible have become part of her everyday life. She still remembers how overwhelming everything felt in the beginning, but she no longer sees herself as the girl who was simply trying to survive one difficult moment after another. She has started building something new from everything she has experienced. That doesn't mean the uncertainty has disappeared. There are still questions about her mother's future, questions about Sophie's own future, and questions about the choices she will have to make as she gets older. But Sophie has stopped treating those questions like problems that must be solved immediately. For the first time, she understands that some questions are meant to stay unanswered for a while. Instead of constantly looking ahead, she starts paying closer attention to what is happening around her. A normal afternoon with her friends can now feel surprisingly meaningful. A conversation with Elizabeth can stay in her mind long after it ends. Even a quiet walk home can make her appreciate how different she has become. She used to think important moments had to be dramatic. Now she knows better. Sometimes an important moment is simply the realization that you are no longer afraid of something that once controlled you. That realization comes to Sophie gradually. She notices it when she thinks about another performance and doesn't feel the same pressure she once felt. She still wants to succeed, but she doesn't feel like her entire identity is attached to the result. If she performs well, she will be proud. If she makes a mistake, she will learn. If someone else gets the opportunity she wanted, she will be disappointed. But she won't allow that disappointment to convince her that she isn't good enough. This is a completely different relationship with ambition. Sophie still dreams big, but now she understands that a dream is supposed to give your life direction, not make you miserable. She begins enjoying rehearsals more because she isn't constantly thinking about the final result. She can focus on the people around her, the story they're creating, and the small improvements that happen every day. There are moments when she catches herself smiling during rehearsal for no particular reason. Those are the moments she values most. Nobody is watching. Nobody is applauding. Nothing important is happening from the outside. But Sophie is happy, and that is enough. Her friendships continue changing too. As everyone starts thinking about the future, Sophie realizes that growing up doesn't necessarily mean staying close to the same people forever. Sometimes people move in different directions. That thought used to scare her. Now she understands that relationships aren't measured only by how much time people spend together. Some people can be part of your life for a short period and still leave a permanent impact. Others may remain with you for years. You can't always know which relationships will last, and maybe you don't need to. What matters is appreciating people while they're part of your life. That idea makes Sophie more present with her friends. She doesn't spend as much time worrying about whether everything will stay exactly the same. Instead, she enjoys what they have now. They joke. They argue. They support one another. They make mistakes. They forgive each other. And slowly, their friendship becomes less about being inseparable and more about genuinely understanding each other. Sophie also becomes more willing to share the parts of herself she once tried to hide. She can admit when she is nervous. She can admit when she doesn't know what to do. She can tell someone that she is having a difficult day without feeling embarrassed. That openness doesn't make her dependent on other people. It makes her stronger because she no longer wastes energy pretending. At home, the same honesty continues. Elizabeth and Sophie have developed a relationship where difficult subjects don't have to destroy the mood of the entire day. They can talk about serious things and then move on to something ordinary. That balance has become important. Sophie has learned that talking about fear doesn't make fear bigger. Sometimes saying something out loud actually makes it smaller. There are still conversations that Sophie wishes she didn't have to have. There are still questions she wishes she didn't need to ask. But she doesn't avoid them anymore. She understands that silence can create a kind of fear that is much worse than reality. When you don't know what someone is thinking, your imagination fills the empty space. And Sophie's imagination has caused her enough anxiety already. So now she chooses communication. She asks, she listens, she responds. And if she doesn't understand something, she admits it. That simple change has made her relationship with her mother more honest than it has ever been. Elizabeth also sees that Sophie is becoming more independent. And instead of being afraid of that independence, she encourages it. She wants Sophie to have her own goals. She wants her daughter to make decisions. She wants her to experience life outside the family. At first, Sophie struggles with that idea because part of her still believes that being a good daughter means always being available. But she slowly realizes that love doesn't require sacrificing your entire identity. You can care about someone without stopping your own life. You can be present without giving up your future. And you can follow your dreams without forgetting where you came from. That becomes one of the most freeing lessons for Sophie. She begins imagining the future again. Not just tomorrow. Not just the next performance, but the years ahead. She thinks about what she might study, where she might go, who she might become. She doesn't have all the answers, but she lets herself imagine possibilities. And that alone is a huge sign of hope. Earlier, thinking about the future was frightening because Sophie believed every plan could be destroyed by something unexpected. Now she sees the future as something that can change without necessarily becoming worse. A plan can fail. Another opportunity can appear. A door can close. Another one can open. Life doesn't have to follow the original script. That idea connects deeply with everything she has learned through theater. A performance may have a script, but unexpected things can still happen. Someone forgets a line. Something goes wrong backstage. A prop isn't where it should be. A performer gets nervous. And yet the scene continues. The actors adapt. The audience may never even know what happened. Sophie realizes that real life is similar. You can prepare as much as possible, but eventually something unexpected will happen. The goal isn't to control every detail. The goal is to know how to continue when things don't go according to plan. Sophie has become much better at that. She doesn't panic as quickly. She doesn't immediately assume the worst. She gives herself time to understand what is happening. Then she decides what she can do. That patience has changed her more than anything else. She is becoming someone who can respond instead of simply react, and that difference becomes visible in almost every part of her life. When something disappoints her, she gives herself time before deciding what it means. When someone hurts her feelings, she doesn't automatically cut them off. When something goes wrong at rehearsal, she doesn't immediately think she has failed. When she becomes afraid about her family, she looks for support instead of keeping everything locked inside. She has finally learned that she doesn't have to carry every emotion by herself. There is another lesson she takes from all of this. She realizes that people often spend too much time waiting for the perfect moment, the perfect opportunity, the perfect relationship, the perfect amount of confidence. The perfect time to chase a dream. But perfect conditions rarely arrive. If she had waited until she wasn't nervous, she might never have stepped onto the stage. If she had waited until she understood everything, she would still be waiting. If she had waited until life became completely safe, she would never truly live. So Sophie stops waiting. She decides to participate in her own life. That means taking chances. It means allowing herself to care. It means accepting that disappointment is possible. And it means choosing happiness when happiness appears. She doesn't know whether every dream will come true. She doesn't know what the next year will look like. She doesn't know exactly where her relationship with theater will lead. She doesn't know what challenges her family may face, but she has stopped believing that uncertainty means she should stand still. She can move while uncertain. She can dream while afraid. She can love while knowing that life is unpredictable. That is the kind of courage Sophie has developed. Not the dramatic kind, the quiet kind, the kind that appears in everyday decisions. And as another chapter begins, Sophie realizes that perhaps she has been searching for the wrong thing all along. She was searching for certainty, for a guarantee that everything would be okay, for some sign that she was making the right choices. But life doesn't give guarantees. What it gives you are moments. People. Opportunities. Memories. And choices. You decide what to do with them. Sophie finally understands that. So when another opportunity appears in front of her, she doesn't spend days asking whether she is ready. She simply considers what it means. She thinks about what she wants. She thinks about what she is afraid of. And then she makes a decision. She chooses to try, because even if it doesn't work out, trying will teach her something. And if it does work out, she will have another experience to carry with her. Either way, she moves forward. That has become Sophie's greatest strength.